Hello and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. I am joined once again by the wonderful, beautiful co-host, Amy Hollenkamp here. I'm getting my sides mixed up. Amy Hollenkamp, RD, what is up?
Hello, not too much. Just living my best life.
That's right. That is right. Spring is here, spring has sprung, and we're bringing you more jam-packed, goodness-filled episodes on the IBS Freedom Podcast. And since this one was your brainchild, would you like to introduce and give us a little bit of something to go off of for this topic? The long versus
Yeah.
short versus long? What the heck are we talking about?
So, this is something that came up recently in a conversation with a client. And really, we're being a little mysterious, I think, in the title of this episode. But I wanted to do an episode where we talk a little bit about how you're approaching your gut journey from a bit of a mindset standpoint, but we're also going to talk about interventions. But thinking of it as a long-term strategy versus a short-term strategy. So this client I talked to actually yesterday, we were talking about how she's noticed a shift in her mindset that's been really helpful, where she felt that she was urgently chasing this microbiome issue. Like she had to figure out how to clear out, she referred to it sometimes as an infection, or she had to clear out this imbalance that's going on, or the SIBO that's going on, or she had some candida going on as well. So like she wanted to clear out some of the dysbiosis that was going on. But she had been doing this for a long period of time, and she felt that some of it was helpful. But during this call with her more recently, she was saying it's been really helpful to sort of take a step back and see that there's so many levers that could help her microbiome that were not specific towards manipulating the microbiome. They're more indirectly helping her gut and the microbiome. But it's also in a weird way helped her reduce some of the urgency. She's seeing that this is going to be a process, and it's taken a bit of the pressure off for her, and it's been really helpful just how she's conceptualizing her journey, and it's helping her, again, not feel like she's having to slam her foot on the gas at all times. So it was just really interesting talking to her about it, because I feel like there was a very similar period in my journey where I felt like everything was very urgent. I had to do this to help with the microbiome, and I wasn't going to feel better until this was better. But a lot of the strategies I was taking in that urgent, more desperate state were very short term. They were trying to get me better right here, right now, versus actually thinking of strategies that would help me get better in 6 months, or 3 months, or would set me up for success more long term. So I think from a mindset standpoint, the things I want to talk about today are just noticing if you're getting more in a short-term mindset. Usually I do think there's more of a desperate energy. Sometimes you're narrowly focusing in on one aspect of your journey versus seeing all the aspects of your journey. And a lot of times fundamentals are missed too if you're focusing on more quick fixy short-term solutions versus long-term solutions that are typically going to be more habits driven and take time to see the benefits. So, and it's not to say that some short-term solutions are bad, because they can certainly be helpful at times to have some things
Sprinkled in, though.
Right. But yeah,
Short-term stuff can't be the foundation.
Exactly. So yeah, I just wanted to open up a discussion around that topic of short and long-term goals. And I think to sum up my journey on it, I feel as though that I found way more success when I wasn't hyper focused on the microbiome and some of the short-term solutions or getting better tomorrow. When I shifted my mindset from thinking that solutions would come very quickly and instead put less pressure on the finish line. So put less pressure on getting better tomorrow or ASAP. Instead, I would shift my mindset and say, you know what, I'm going to get better. There's different levers to pull on here. What can I pull on that will get me to that finish line, but I'm not in a rush to that finish line. So again, it's a much more of a relaxing, in a weird way, it feels more relaxed when you take that pressure off the finish line, with like wanting short-term, right here, right now solutions. If you take your foot off the gas a little bit and can see all the variables and start chipping away at different variables, that's usually when I see people making more progress. And it was definitely a huge factor for me, that mindset shift. Because like I said, it took pressure off me getting better at a certain time frame and instead focused on the systems that were going to get me better.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to talk about this with you in more depth because I feel that we can have a pretty nuanced conversation about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is really important. But you know what's funny? I thought of this as you were talking, and I've been kind of chuckling internally about it.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Everybody says that they like holistic stuff, right? Like I think most of our listeners and the providers and the like healthcare people that we kind of pal around with, everybody pretty much unanimously would agree that holistic is better. And, oh, I can't believe conventional medicine. How dare they break you up into bits and pieces and send you off to specialists, and the specialist just hyper focuses on one body part and ignores the rest of the body. I can't believe how bad of a system this is. You need to do the holistic thing. But then, so like they say that, but then in actuality, if we're basing this off of people's actions, people don't care as much about doing the holistic thing. If people have a gut problem, say bloating or abdominal pain or pooping problems, even the people in the holistic health world, or even people who say that they want to do things holistically, most people are still hyper focusing on the gut. And then you try to make the point, sometimes, I won't say this for all of the people I've worked with, but sometimes I'll find myself trying to make the point of, hey, like stress could be playing a really big role here, or we need to work on the eating disorder stuff and getting you eating more, or what about exercise, or what about your crappy sleep? Like I'll try to bring in things that are not directly related to the gut, and not all the time, but oftentimes people kind of are like, oh, no. Like, no, I need gut stuff. Like, what magic probiotic can you prescribe me? Or what magic, thing for my tummy can you prescribe me? And it's like, stop, please. You say you want to do things holistically, but then it's like anything outside of direct gut support, oftentimes people are either shutting down that conversation or they're at least poo-pooing it a little bit. Pun totally intended, by the way. So, but
Right.
if we wanted to just kind of rapid fire, let's throw out a couple of examples. Okay, exercise doesn't seem like it's directly related to your microbiome, but it has been shown that exercise increases microbial diversity. So,
Right.
boom, exercise can help. Doesn't feel like it would.
Well, and I think that people underestimate, when they're poo-pooing it, in my mindset, it's like they're underestimating the power of that thing. Or they think a more gut-directed thing would be more powerful, which...
Or quicker. Again, and that
quicker.
goes back to the short versus long game.
Right. And there could be some gut-directed thing that might quickly reduce symptoms somewhat, but you're going to have a hard time resolving gut issues if there are fundamental things that are out of whack for you.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't mean that they have to be perfect or that you have to exercise every day of your life or whatever, you know.
No.
But there has to be some balance in your approach. And when you're so short-sighted and on short-term solutions, you fail typically to have a balanced approach.
You know what could be an interesting at-home exercise for people right now? Pause this episode. Go grab, not you, Amy, because you're in the episode, so you don't get to pause anything.
I was about to run.
Listeners, right now, pause this episode, run and get yourself a pad of paper and a pen or a pencil. These are things that we used to use for writing before we had tablets and phones, by the way. Okay, I'm going to pretend that you paused the episode and you're back now. Write down all of the treatment things that you're doing right now. So every supplement, every herb, every strategy that you're implementing for the sake of your IBS or your SIBO or your gut health. Write those on one side, say the left-hand side of the page. Then draw a line down the middle of the page. And on the other side, just write down what bodily system or what thing they're trying to address. So you could write down sleep, stress, movement, gut support, hormone support, immune support, nutrition, just overall, like not gut specific nutrition, just overall nutrition. But I bet for a lot of you, if you took the time to write down all of the things you're doing and all of the things you're taking, and then you looked at that right-hand side of the page, I bet well over 50% of what you're doing is directly gut focused, right? And that's part of the message here, is that if you're hyper focusing on one body system, you might not be seeing the forest for the trees. You might be too laser focused on one body system and you're possibly ignoring other areas of the body or other aspects of your health that could use some TLC. And if you could just take a pause, back up a little bit, zoom out, and evaluate like how much you're laser focused on the gut versus how much other stuff you're bringing into the picture, that might give you a little bit of perspective here.
Yeah, it's a really good idea. I like that idea. Another thing just to think about, and I see this often with clients. So when I have a follow-up call with a client, I'll have them fill out a form asking them, like, what are the 3 major things that you've been focusing on? And it is always interesting because usually, especially after an initial call, I'll usually lay out different strategies. And again, I'll separate them by diet, lifestyle, supplemental. Well, you better believe that like every follow-up call, the main stuff I see in there is, oh, I added in the supplement. It's always the supplements that I feel like come first. And I'm not trying to pick on any clients or anything, but supplement strategies are going to be almost always more short-term. Now, there are some longer-term options in there, but usually the goal is not to be on a supplement forever. Supplements could help you initiate long-term goals if they like give you more energy or help reduce bloating, so then you can add more diversity in, or help with motility. They can help with long-term goals, but in and of themselves, they should be more short-term solutions. Again, to me, at least, the goal is not to have someone on a bunch of supplements forever so that they can function. But they can be a bridge to initiating strategies that will help your long-term goals. They can be a bridge to long-term strategies. So, but it is something to think about too, if you're putting so much emphasis on supplements and less on other things that are more lifestyle. I typically think diet and lifestyle are going to be more long-term strategies versus supplement strategies. Now there's different nuancy things you could potentially think of lifestyle and diet-wise that could be more short-term. Like if you did a fast or something, I don't know, like there could be some variation in there, but typically lifestyle, like habit changes that are more lifestyle and diet related are going to be more long-term solution focused versus anything supplementals should, in my mind, be a little bit more short-term or a bridge to long-term solutions.
I agree. I think also probably the middle point. I agree. So I think probably 80 or 90% of supplements that you would take are probably more short-term
Yeah.
solutions. With the exception, I think, if you go back to the episodes where we talk about herbs for stress, like the nervines or adaptogens, those sorts of herbs, I think are best suited for longer term strategies. Most people aren't going to take milky oat and then the next day be like, wow, I feel so much more resilient. It's going to be more of like months and months in the making. So with the exception of like the stress modulating, adrenal modulating type of stuff, I think, antimicrobials, anti-candida stuff, prokinetics, leaky gut healer uppers, probiotics, vitamins and minerals, like those are typically things that we would take in hopes that we see a quick turnaround. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But I do think herbs and supplements are going to be much more short-term strategy versus, like you said, lifestyle and habit changes tend to be more long-term strategy focused. I like that you brought up fasting because I think a fast is probably one exception. I think the halfway between mark is going to be nutrition. And it really just depends on how you're approaching nutrition. Mm-hmm. If you're doing a cleanse or a detox, actually, here, better yet, if you're doing a diet, and especially if that diet has a name, that is a short-term strategy. That is short-term.
It should be short-term.
Well, yeah. But people do those because they're hoping it'll make them feel better within a couple of days or a week or a month, right? So it's more instant gratification-y feeling, certainly, versus if you're working on nutrition, but it's not like a specific diet, it doesn't have a name, you're just focusing on eating enough and maybe getting a little bit more carbs and maybe emphasizing healthy fat or bumping up your protein or, getting more fiber or more colors. Like if you're doing stuff like that, if you're doing nutrition that you might learn about in a like nutrition 101 lecture almost, then I think that's more long-term focused. But again, if you're doing a diet and especially if that diet has a name or if it has like a medical treatment in mind, that is definitely more of a short-term strategy kind of thing. And again, it's not to say short-term is bad, but they should be used for only short-term relief, maybe a month or two for a lot of these diets. And number two, again, the number of short-term things that you're doing or these short game items that you're implementing, they just shouldn't make up the majority or the foundation of your treatment plan.
Yeah, it's I like how you separated those two. In terms of optimizing nutrition as a whole, I believe is what you're describing, where it's how do I eat in a way that makes me thrive?
Eating to be a healthy human on the one side versus eating for SIBO or eating for candida.
And I think from a long-term standpoint, that could change over time too. So I think nutrition in general is a bit of a journey across the lifespan. I mean, me currently, the way I'm eating is totally different than I typically eat when I'm not lactating. So there is maybe going to be some nuance over time and some adjustments that happen over time. But to me, the goal of nutrition is trying to ensure that you're getting enough micronutrition and finding a macronutrition balance that feels good to you. Because everyone's going to have some slight differences, and maybe you need a little bit more protein than the average person. That feels best to you. Maybe you need a little bit more carbs, but it takes experimenting on a consistent basis to figure that out. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but usually when you do start dabbling with nutrition, you start getting a sense of, I feel really good when I eat this particular meal and in this balance of macros. How could I utilize that a little bit more? I do think that there's general trends I see. So when I work with clients, sometimes I'll say, oh, probably 95% of people wouldn't feel as good eating this amount of carbs consistently. Let's adjust that and see how you do. And then once we get to that point, we might need to make additional adjustments. Maybe we try upping the carbs a bit more, see if that continues to make them feel better. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe we just drop down a little bit more. So it is a process that takes a little bit of time to sort out. And the last point, in terms of the diets that have a name, that have something they're trying to solve, this is at the core of some mindset issues that come with short-term thinking in my mind, is that I don't think supplements in and of themselves can usually solve the problem, or, diets in and of themselves. A SIBO diet is going to solve the SIBO. But that's the promise a lot of times, is these supplements in and of themselves will solve all the gut issues.
Yeah. This is the cure.
Right.
If you just do this or take this.
Right. And I think people have a come to Jesus moment when they realize that that promise isn't going to happen. And that mindset switch, at least for me, was like a flip of a switch. And it actually helped me in a lot of ways, because I realized no amount of restrictive diet's really going to solve the problem. No amount of me throwing supplements at this thing is going to solve the problem if I'm majorly stressed and nutrient depleted and all these other things that were going on in my scenario. So I believe at the crux of this issue is feeling like you can solve the problem completely with with some short-term interventions, and it just isn't a promise that will come to fruition, and then you're just frustrated. And most of my clients get to a breaking point, and that's usually when they find us or they want to try something different. But yeah, that to me is the crux of the issue, is this promise that will never be fulfilled.
Yeah. Or at least it won't ever be fulfilled for, I think, the majority of people.
Right.
There probably are those freak people, right?
Yeah. The people that took rifaximin one time and then they're
exactly.
good.
But those are not the people who are listening to our podcast.
Right.
They have no reason to listen to our podcast because, again, those weirdo people, they took rifaximin once and they're just frolicking off into the sunset and they're totally cured and they're good. So I think that in a weird way, listening to our podcast right now is a symptom that tips you off that you're probably in this camp that we're describing, where, no amount of dietary restriction is going to solve the problem or cure you. No amount of supplements is going to directly cure you or solve the problem. There's got to be some other stuff too. And again, I think also no amount of pure, unadulterated, gut-focused work is going to cure you. If you feel like you've gotten to a point where you've tried all of the gut supplements, you probably have. And that's exactly the problem. Right? Like, oh, I've tried glutamine. I've tried probiotics of multiple varieties. I've tried spore probiotics. I've tried prokinetics. I've tried bitters and digestive enzymes and HCl and bile and this candida supplement and 15 different antimicrobials. And oh my God. And again, it's like at some point you have to step back and go, oh, but all of that stuff is focused on basically one thing, one body part, the GI tract. Maybe I just need to put this on a shelf somewhere,
right,
and walk away. And I've seen people get better from quote unquote SIBO or IBS or some gut problem when we do absolutely nothing for the gut.
Right.
Nothing.
Right.
We work on other stuff. We work on sleep and stress and hormones and nutrition just overall, and then their gut miraculously gets better.
Right.
So
I've seen, like you said, I've seen people take an iron supplement and all their symptoms go away. And like gnarly stuff that I was not anticipating happening.
I have a student right now in FODMAP Freedom that she is sleeping legitimately well for the first time in her life.
Right.
And she's like, I'm pooping every single day.
Yeah.
Every day. And she had constipation coming into the class. And just kind of acknowledging that you need to prioritize sleep and like giving her some of the tools to prioritize sleep. Between that and like chewing her food more and doing more mindful eating stuff, she's pooping every single day and she's feeling a lot better already. Now, she still has a ways to go to broaden out her diet,
Right.
but she's already making really great progress. And one of the big things for her was sleep.
Right.
And again, you might be tempted to think that the sleep is completely separate from your gut, but I guarantee you it's not. There's wild
Right.
research on what they call the microbial clock.
Yeah.
And basically the microbes have a circadian rhythm and they get all of their cues from us and our behavior and our eating and our circadian rhythm.
Right.
So, again, everything is connected. I think the eyelashes on your left eyeball are connected to the toenail on your right toe.
Right.
I don't know how, but they're all connected in some way. And again, like if we really value the holistic thing and we want to treat things holistically, we need to, I don't know what I'm trying to articulate here. I guess we can't just say that. We can't
Right.
just feign interest in doing things holistically. We actually need to put our money where our mouth is and take the time and take the effort to do the things that feel like they're not at all related to the gut. I promise all of them are related to your gut. It's just you might not fully understand how or why that works. But that's kind of part of trusting the process, trusting your body and its ability to heal, in some weird way, trusting us and, just trusting that we wouldn't give you a bum steer.
Right.
In that, I don't know, like there's a lot of trust that folds into this too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many examples I could give with clients, maybe underestimating certain things and then trying and being like, whoa, this was way more powerful than I thought. It also makes me chuckle a little bit thinking about the people that went on rifaximin and immediately felt better and had no long-term issues. I wonder if those people might have better foundational skills too.
Possibly.
Maybe they took a PPI or something and that just threw things off and they're off the PPI and took rifaximin and it sort of resolved the issue. Something like that, but their stress is pretty good. Their lifestyle's pretty good. They eat pretty nutrient-dense foods, and then they move on. And then there could be people that are just total anomalies that have crap lifestyle and diet and take rifaximin and feel amazing and move on too. But it does make me wonder, the people that do seem to have a lot of symptom resolution post just a single intervention of something, makes me wonder if they have a more solid foundation compared to some people that don't necessarily get that effect.
I bet that that's probably largely true. Again, to your point, there's probably the weirdos out there who are eating Big Macs every single meal.
Right.
And, it's just they have like this weird resiliency that's superhuman. But I do think that probably that's largely true. I think that the one health condition that threw that on its side and we haven't fully figured it out yet is COVID.
Yeah.
Right? Like we've all heard the stories, right? Where somebody was really unhealthy, like smoker, obese, diabetic, eating terrible, terrible food, never moving their body, and they get COVID and it's like 2 sniffles, 1 booger, and
Right.
then they move on with their life and they're like, oh, that COVID was no big deal. And then you have the people who have like run marathons and they eat kale every day. Maybe a little orthorexic if you're eating kale every day. But you know what I mean? Like the people who
Right.
are super healthy and then they get COVID and it absolutely destroys them.
Right.
So COVID is the wild card in this, where maybe your baseline health and your baseline foundations, that may or may not play directly into it as much. But I think for most other health conditions, what you're describing is true. I think that if you have the solid foundations And the nutrition, the stress management, the movement, the sleep, the relationships, you get outside. If you're laying the foundation with all of that stuff and then you have something happen, it's just like a little blip on the radar, and then your body has that resiliency to steer the ship and right the ship again. Versus if you're already unhealthy, or if you're already inflamed or super, super stressed, or if your sleep is shit and then something happens, then it's just like, that one thing throws you into a dumpster and lights it on fire. And then you're left with this dumpster fire for years and years and years to come, potentially.
Yeah. And it brings me a bit to another point, which is, if you are listening to this and saying, oh yeah, I'm definitely more focusing on some short-term solutions, expecting long-term results, because that's really, again, the promise. And you've been frustrated and you might feel like you're operating in more of a desperate, urgent manner. In terms of how to get out of that mindset, I think it's helpful just to try to conceptualize like a willingness or just accepting where you're at in the journey. You might not be where you want to be. Especially if you're listening to this podcast, I'd imagine a lot of people are not necessarily where they want to be gut-wise. And I'm a big believer that, you can get where you want to be. It's just maybe taking a step back and thinking about how you can move forward, or what you can do now that might help you 6 months from now. That's really the question I might continue to focus in on, is what little things can you incorporate into your lifestyle on a week-to-week basis, or maybe even a month-to-month basis if it's like a massage or something, because rarely are people going to get a massage like once a week. But, there could be strategies you work in like once a month or something like that. Or making sure you're doing something all day with friends once a month. I don't know what it is, but you could work stuff in monthly. But trying to think of some concrete strategies that you can incorporate in on a weekly basis or a daily basis, whatever it is, to set you up for success. In really trying to solidify some of the foundational pieces. And again, just asking yourself some questions of, it's okay, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm kind of accepting where I'm at, and I don't need to be rushing to the finish line. I will get there. It would be nice to be better yesterday, but,
Obviously, that's the obvious thing.
Right.
In this whole episode, we should have led with that. We want you to be better ASAP.
Right.
We don't want you to suffer for any longer than you have to. But again, I think one of the things we're trying to focus on is that when you're rushing to the finish line, you're not going to notice a lot of the stuff that you could be working on. Again, you've got kind of blinders on and you're frantically trying to get there as soon as possible. And there could be an answer right next to you here, and you have no idea it's there because you've got a blinder on and you can't see. But if you take a second to slow down and look around and kind of take your time with the process a little bit more, you might see a really obvious answer or a really huge thing that might help you profoundly. Like, again, like sleep. You might finally be able to see that if you slow down a little bit, and if you kind of tone back that frantic kind of energy. And there's one thing I just want to point out briefly, and then I have an analogy to share from the brain of Nikki yet again. All of these like weird ways of looking at things. I think that we need to point out the parallels with some of what we've talked about regarding health anxiety and health OCD. And again, like this like desperate, frantic energy. Sometimes if you're having a really hard time stepping back and zooming out and doing things that are not directly related to your chief complaint, if you're finding that that's a really big struggle for you, or it feels just like really dangerous to do that, right? If you're listening to us right now and you're like, they're crazy people, this is dangerous. If I don't treat the candida right now, it's going to infect my eyeballs or something. I don't know. If you're having that kind of sensation, like this conversation almost is scary to you or it feels dangerous to you, then I think exploring health OCD or at the bare minimum health anxiety would be worthwhile. I'll let you weigh in on that. And then I want to share this like different way of thinking of things that you'll see. I'll weigh in on the health OCD anxiety comment first.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on my journey, I definitely had that, and it does create a much higher degree of anxiety around the urgency, or like you said, it feels irresponsible to not address an outright candida issue right here, right now. It feels irresponsible. And
or
if you
SIBO.
if you get stuck there, like you said, I think it also can be helpful to look at how big or small your world's gotten since you've been in the gut health space. For people that have anxiety and OCD, or health anxiety or health OCD along this journey, like I did, my world got very tiny. And so if you feel like everything's revolving around your gut journey, and that's not to take away that you might have some debilitating symptoms that make it a little bit harder to engage, but even some of the more severe cases that I've worked with can still engage somewhat with their family, with their friends, with their lifestyle that they want to lead. Sometimes the health OCD, health anxiety, and how wrapped up you are in the journey can take you too much out of that. So if you feel like your world's very small, I might also look into health OCD anxiety, or work with a therapist. It could be, even if you are having that much symptomology, working with a therapist might be helpful just to help you manage how hard this is on your life, managing a chronic condition that's that symptom producing. But more often than not, I think health OCD and anxiety can make the issue much bigger and scarier and pull your attention and make you latch into it, hook into it more. And you're right, that can be really challenging. That can be a challenging hurdle to jump over if that's going on. Make it much harder to focus on long-term strategies, because the short-term strategies feel so urgent and so dangerous that it makes it more challenging to even consider doing other things.
Well, and I think you worded it well. It feels, if you had sepsis, right? Let's just pick something really overt, really life-threatening, in your face, holy crap, right? If you had sepsis, it would be genuinely irresponsible and genuinely dangerous to not treat it right away, because it could kill you, right? Similarly, if you were in some freak accident and your left arm was lobbed off at the shoulder and it was squirting out blood, like I'm talking like Monty Python style, squirting blood out, you wouldn't be the person who's like, oh, but let me just like finish prepping for dinner and then I'll go to the hospital.
Right.
You would want to get that treated immediately, because it could be very dangerous or life-threatening if you don't treat it immediately. And I'm not trying to insinuate at all that the symptoms you're dealing with don't suck very, very badly. I know they can.
Right.
But the reality is, the stuff that you're dealing with, if you're listening to this episode, it's not immediately life-threatening. It's not truly urgent. I know that you want to feel better right away, and we want that for you. But that's the thing, is like, I think sometimes people do have this energy of, oh my God, like this is my entire life and I have to feel better right away. And oh my God, and it's like dangerous if I don't treat the SIBO. It's dangerous if I don't treat the candida. And honestly, again, I'm going to throw my profession under the bus. I think that I blame the internet in general, and I blame the damn functional medicine and naturopathic community, because there's also a lot of really blatant, intentional fear mongering that has led you to believe that. Like,
Right.
not a lot of people would feel as freaked out by Candida if it weren't for the horde of Candida diet books and Candida protocol
Yeah.
books and the influencers who focus on Candida and the functional medicine people and the people selling you oat tests and selling you the interpretation of the tests and selling you the supplements and the pills and the potions. And the same thing goes for SIBO. The same thing goes for whatever else. So just keep that in mind too, is that unfortunate, how the saying is that sex sells?
Yeah.
I think that that's true in a lot of industries, but in the healthcare industry, fear sells.
Oh, yeah.
And if influencers or if doctors or if healthcare professionals or health coaches, if they can make you fear something, they're going to get more money out of you. And they know that. And that is
Yeah.
an intentional marketing strategy on the part of some people. So
Well, and a couple things to note too. So the fear drives you for an urgent solution, but like we've been saying, these short-term solutions, a lot of them are empty promises. Or again, not the full promise that you're just going to immediately be better and you can frolic off into the sunset half the time. That's sort of the promise of, oh, if you just take rifaximin, you'll be fine. Or if you just take these herbals, you're going to be good to go. Right. That is an empty promise. And so sometimes releasing the idea that there is a quick fix or something that's just going to immediately get you better, releasing that idea, if something was like that, that's amazing. If you are that random person that took rifaximin, that'd be amazing. But that's the exception, not the rule. So typically with my clients, just being able to say like, even if you are in an urgent state and there is something that you could go to, it's probably not going to be what you think it's going to be. So, and then about the fear. So something that's interesting, the more I've learned about OCD on my journey with postpartum OCD, is there's her account's called the anxiety paradox, and she talks about this a lot. But fear doesn't equal danger. So that's one thing that's super helpful for me. Just thinking about
find her account right now while you talk.
Conceptualizing things, but fear doesn't equal danger, but it feels dangerous. If you fear is a feeling, but a feeling isn't really dangerous. And you can think about it too in the terms of food. Like expanding the diet feels so dangerous, but is broccoli dangerous? No. You could have a reaction to it, but I would argue it's not dangerous to try foods. But when you have intense food fear or anxiety around foods or OCD around foods, or orthorexia or whatever you want to call it, if you have some really intense fear around foods feel very dangerous. That doesn't mean they are. We don't know how you're going to respond to foods if you've cut them out for a while. You might need to build up some tolerance to foods, but foods aren't dangerous. But I've been in the mentality where I saw food as danger because I had so much fear around it. But you can have fears, and you're safe. Like you can have all these intense fears. You could have fears that you're never going to get better from SIBO. But in this current moment, you're safe. So it's strange. Fear does weird stuff, and can really distort how you're thinking about things, and raise the urgency of things. And just being able to step back and say, well, I feel fear, but in this current moment, I'm safe. Or, foods feel really dangerous, but are they? So being able to take a step back when you're acting in a fearful sense, or you're feeling a lot of fear around something, I almost think being able to take a step back when those feelings are rushing through you, it's very hard because a lot of your executive functioning goes out the window when you are in a fearful state. But it takes practice. But it has been something that's been really helpful for me when I'm in a state of like a high degree of fear or even panic, is just acknowledging, hey, I'm feeling afraid or scared, but that's okay. I can go and do what I need to do, being scared or afraid. Same thing again, someone could add a new food in that they're scared of. If they're afraid of that food, bring that fear, that scare, being a little bit scared with you, but try to push through it and, not view foods as dangerous. And it's not to say like you could have a reaction to food, but unless you're like an outright celiac or something.
I was actually going to use that as an example though, like, because I am a celiac. And even for me, is wheat immediately life-threatening for me? No. I will poop a lot.
Right.
Like a lot. And it will be unpleasant.
Right.
And I do understand the long-term effects of unmanaged celiac disease. So I'm not saying that I eat gluten intentionally. But really, in the strictest sense, gluten is not immediately dangerous in the sense, again, like the sense of urgency and the sense of danger, like my life is threatened in this moment. It really isn't. I would say the one exception to the food thing in this context is anaphylactic food allergies. If you have an anaphylactic allergy to a peanut, then peanuts could be genuinely dangerous to you, because if you accidentally ingest one, and if you don't have like an EpiPen or Benadryl or whatever handy, or if you're in a place where you can't get immediate medical care, that peanut could kill you legitimately. Again, if I get exposed to gluten on a hike through the Andes, and
where are you planning a vacation that I don't know about?
But like just somewhere remote, away from normal, normal supplements and Pepto-Bismol and medical care and toilets and whatnot. Like if I was just out in the middle of nowhere and I got exposed to wheat, I would be alive. Like I would survive. I would have to stop for frequent pooping trips for the rest of the hike.
The experience wouldn't be fun, but what happens in someone's mind that's anxious or OCD, the potential for symptoms or like becomes so much bigger and more scary because there's a hyper focus on avoiding symptoms. So that's where it gets a little squirrely. I was just talking to someone and I actually feel like this person isn't necessarily anxious, but she's someone that gets diarrhea and she's been doing a lot better. But she had a bit of a flare-up because she had eaten a meal. And looking back, she thinks she just rushed off to an appointment. She ate really quickly, rushed off to an appointment to get her hair cut or something. And she had, some urgency. And it was like scary because it was like, oh my gosh, there's no bathroom. Or not really scary, but just there's a level of like, oh my gosh, what if I don't make it to the bathroom? It was not a fun experience. Now, was it dangerous? No. Like, could there have been some embarrassment or something like that if she didn't make it to the bathroom? Yes. But luckily, she was able to make it back to her place. But it was like a walk. It was a walk. There weren't any public bathrooms. So, but in someone with anxiety's head, that does seem dangerous. There's some sort of I don't even know how to describe it, but
I think I do. Can I interrupt you?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Remember way back when, like towards the beginning of season one of our very first guests was Julia King.
Yeah.
And we talked a bit about, I think she talked about it in the context of like a zebra and a lion, but this idea that our nervous systems interpret perceived danger in a very similar way, whether we are perceiving danger from shitting our pants in public, which would be mortifying.
Right.
Or trying a new food and not knowing what will happen versus you are a zebra on the Serengeti and there's a lion actively hunting you right now and you could immediately die. All of that's kind of the same from the nervous system's point of view. You get the same stress response and stress chemistry and the cortisol and the adrenaline and the heart rate and everything's kind of the same. And again, like you mentioned before, the executive functioning part of your nervous system, the frontal lobe, the part that makes all the smarty pants decisions and has like complex thought and critical thinking, like this part of the brain that's in charge of all that smarty pants stuff just shuts down. And the rest of your nervous system, the lizard brain, takes over when you're in that threatened state. And that's where we can make frantic, not so good decisions when we're scared. Because again, like to us, it's like we're being chased by a lion out on the Serengeti.
Right.
And our nervous system is losing perspective and losing the ability to differentiate between, again, something that would be absolutely mortifying, but not kill you, versus something that could very well kill you.
Right. Well, and it reminds me too of Jenna Overball when she was on. She said something along the lines of, when you have OCD, you can't tell the difference between a garden hose and a snake. Similar to that, like you can misinterpret signals or thoughts or things again as being more dangerous than they are. But yeah, I think when you have anxiety or OCD, you also ruminate about things, which again makes them bigger and bigger and scarier and scarier and scarier. So yeah, I mean, I think the underlying fear a lot for people that have SIBO is that if they eat a certain food, the SIBO is going to be back, and then their life's like the underlying fear there is that that they're just going to have never-ending SIBO and never beat the SIBO. But in reality, that isn't the case. So again,
you're
there is
a bit more bloated or gassy, or you
Right.
have weird poops for like a day, and then you can just pick up where you left off after that symptom resolves.
So yeah, I think there's an exercise in the the anxiety space and the OCD space. I don't know who coined this, but it's like think about the best case scenario that could happen, the probable scenario that could happen, and the worst case scenario. So like for a lot of people, the worst case scenario of adding a food in is that their SIBO comes back and they never get better. I think the most probable thing, if you added a food in that you hadn't had in a while, maybe you get a little bloated and have a little gas or something. The best case scenario is that you would feel really good eating it and have no issues. So all those options could happen, but I think someone with the anxiety OCD side overemphasize the worst case scenario and don't even think about like the probable or best case scenario.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. It's almost, this is going to get a little bit more woo than I'm capable of speaking to, but
I can't wait for this.
I have some dear friends who are much more woo than me. And I think, is this what people talk about when they talk about quantum physics? Like the idea that there are multiple planes of reality all happening at once. And I kind of picture, we're here in this moment and we can basically choose like which version of reality we proceed towards with every moment, every step, every decision of our lives. We're choosing between an infinite number of realities. I think that this is like the quantum physics world, if I remember right. I don't know. I need to look up Joe Dispenza's stuff or something.
I feel like it's funny because I almost think it's just accepting that all three could happen.
Yeah, they all already exist. That's what I'm kind of trying to get at.
All three could happen. In reality, you feeding the SIBO or something, again, there's no evidence to suggest that anyway, but if we're feeding into the scenarios that I laid out, in reality, you having like an insane reaction to something that you can't come back from is so the percentage that could happen is so small. But again, in the anxiety OCD space, it feels equal to the other options. Yeah. And so it feels so much more probable, even though it's unlikely. And so, yeah, it's being able to accept that that could happen. It probably won't. And, you know, it's a 0.2% or whatever, point whatever percent, really small chance that would happen from trying a food. But, you know, maybe that could happen. I don't know. And just accepting that, and then accepting that more than likely that won't happen, and there's other options that could happen, and taking the risk.
And there are scenarios too that you probably can't even think of.
Right.
I don't like, just to go with the absurd, because I think my brain likes to go there anyway. You know, like, option number one, you eat the food, it feeds the SIBO, it feeds the candida, you never recover. Right? The doom and gloom.
Right.
Worst case scenario, you feed the SIBO, it comes back, you never get rid of it. End of story. The probable is either that you have a little bit of bloating or a little bit of funny poops for like a day, and then it's a little hiccup and you get over it easily. No harm, no foul. Also probable is that you try the food and it goes totally well, and then you get to eat that food. Again, there's an infinite number of possibilities of things that could happen. You could bite into that apple. Let's just use an apple. You could bite into that apple, and then, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger could knock on your door, and you open the door and you have the apple in your hand and you're eating the first bite of the apple. You open the door and Arnold Schwarzenegger's like, I feel obligated to do the accent, but I can't, but I'm going to try. Oh my God. You have been entered into our apple eating contest. Here's your check for $10 million. I'm so proud of you. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger gives you a hug and leaves, and you have a check for $10 million. I'm not saying that this is probable.
Right.
But again, the point is there are an infinite number of possibilities with every action and every decision we make. And who's to say which one's going to play out? When I eat my next apple, I'm hoping and praying Arnold Schwarzenegger comes through my door and gives me a check for $10 million.
Right.
I don't know if it's probable, but every time I eat an apple now, I'm going to think of this.
Right.
But anyway, just again, to go with the absurd and to just point out there are so many possibilities. And again, like, your brain just tends to focus on the worst case scenario version of that, but that's one of a gazillion different possibilities that are ahead.
Right. Probable doesn't equal possible doesn't equal probable.
Yeah, and, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it is so interesting, and the more you focus on the unlikely but possible option, the more intense the fear and the anxiety becomes. So,
and it feels much more probable the more you focus on it.
Right, exactly. So it's just such a tricky game.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you one more time. See, now we're almost getting into manifestation kind of stuff. Ooh. So again, we're going real woo. But
I feel like if we have a woo moment, we need like a theme song or something for like woo woo corner or something.
You work on the theme song. I already did my best Arnold Schwarzenegger impression for you this episode, so I feel like I'm tapped out.
Okay,
for embarrassing
that was
things.
Actually,
but
I was very
woo woo corner.
I was very impressed with your Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That was
unexpected,
but
very pleasant. Honestly,
yes, I'm pretty proud of that moment. But shoot, what was I just gonna say though? Woo. Oh, so we were saying that focusing on the worst case scenario makes it feel more real and more probable than it actually is. And we're kind of loosely getting into manifestation now. If you keep thinking about that scenario and you keep assuming that it's going to happen, then when you do get the guts to try the apple or the broccoli or the whatever, you might have brought that into existence by hyper focusing on it so much. But that is exactly why I'm going to think of Arnold Schwarzenegger bringing me a check for $10 million. I'm going to think about that scenario every day for the rest of my life until it happens, because I'm going to manifest that into happening.
Right. Well,
Gosh
it becomes
darn it.
about the hypervigilance then. So, like, okay, you're freaked out to eat something and you're looking for every symptom. This is why I try to avoid to an extent. Sometimes symptom tracking can be really helpful, so I'm not against this totally. But for people that tend to be hypervigilant or hyper focused on reactions, I would not track. I would definitely avoid tracking, because if you're looking for symptoms, you will find them. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's so interesting. And that's another thing too, from a short and long-term standpoint. If you're adding foods in, you might have some short-term bumps that you're going to hit so that you can get to the long-term goals that you're trying to reach.
True.
And this is also something to, they talk about this. I feel like I've mentioned this in a past podcast episode, but there is a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he talks about the Valley of Disappointment. And this is something that I believe prevents a lot of people from focusing on long-term goals, because usually anytime you're implementing something that's more long-term focused, meaning that you're not going to get immediate results, there can be this valley of disappointment. Maybe you tried meditation for 2 weeks and you're thinking, I don't know. Or you tried walking and you're not noticing immediate benefits after a week of doing it. That's called the valley of disappointment. You have to do something long enough to create long-term, like more physiological changes to see the benefits across maybe a number of months before giving up. So I do believe that there's a lot of these things we've been talking about where people will try something for a period of time and not get immediate results, and they throw in the towel a bit too early. So that's something to think about too. And in the context of food intro, it's really prominent with some of the clients we work with where they try food and maybe there is like a 2 to 4 week period where their gut's shifting a lot and they're adding different foods in and they're a little bit more bloated and they have more gas and their stool's changing. That might be the valley of disappointment that you have to get through. But if you're so freaked out at the twinge of the bloating coming back,
then you're never going to get to the hill
the
or
other
whatever
side.
on the other
Yeah,
side.
you're never going to get...
Does he have a name for what's on the other side?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, then we need to name it right here and now. Okay, so it's going to
Yeah.
be a hill or a mountain, first of
Okay,
all,
yep.
presumably. So what are we going to call it? Is it a hill? Let's go big or go home. It's a mountain. It's Magnificent Mountain.
Yes.
Okay, so you have to go through the Valley of Disappointment to get to Magnificent Mountain. But if the valley freaks you out too bad and you turn around, you're never going to get to Magnificent Mountain.
Right.
Is what you're trying to say.
Yep.
And that's a really good point with food intro. And again, I'm going to point out the hypocrisy in this world. And then I'm going to laugh at myself for a second just to make the point that we're all human and we're trying to approach this from a place of love. We're also joking around and poking fun at you guys to keep it lighthearted, but I've
done all this stuff that I'm talking about too.
Yeah.
So
and like I'm currently doing some of it even, and I'll share that in a second. But, we all have a lot of shared human brain lesions. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we're sitting on some pedestal saying like, oh, we never have fear and we're never making short-term decisions. I'm only thinking about 52 years in the future. Aren't we great? Like that's not where we're coming from. And I got sidetracked with my own little theatrical thing that I just did, and I lost track of the thing I was going to share. What were you saying before? Oh, the Valley of Disappointment and the mountain, Magnificent Mountain. The hypocrisy is, how many times have you heard people say that they have a die-off reaction and they just need to push through the die-off reaction because they know they're going to feel better on the other side of it?
Right.
So people are willing to do that for antimicrobials. You're willing to go through the valley of disappointment or the flare-up in symptoms because you have the promise of a mountain on the other side.
Right.
If you're willing to do it for antimicrobials, why the heck won't you do it for the food introduction when you eat a serving or 2 or 3 of guacamole and then you freak out and you like restrict your diet even harder? Again, like that's a wee bit hypocritical in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It definitely is. I know it's again, the marketing pitch is so strong for some of the short-term solutions, and it's less work. That's the other thing. It's just hard. It's hard to change habits. Anything that I feel like most people that I work with have an area that needs work. Everyone has their weak point, whether it's sleep
We all do.
or diet or movement or stress management. Usually of those 4, at least one needs a lot of work when I work with clients, maybe multiple areas. Maybe someone's doing pretty well lifestyle wise, but their diet just needs tweaking. But usually most of my clients need some degree of tweaking in those areas. And it's not hard. It could be obvious and simple if you hate your job that could be affecting things, but it's not an easy fix.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm moving away from my mic again. I'm turning back.
I did
I'm learning.
think of that.
I'm learning.
Again, I need to
You
have
saw
some
me,
sort
like,
of shocker or a
you saw
buzzer
me.
that I.
You saw me moving away, and you were.
Poor Mixmaster Mike is going to have to tackle that one.
But yeah, none of these things are easy. That's the other thing. It's hard to change habits.
Taking pills is
Right.
great.
Right.
It is great because it's so easy. Getting your ass to the yoga studio, doing yoga 3 times a week, or actually working on your toxic relationships, or setting boundaries with people when you've never set a boundary in your damn life. Those are hard.
Right.
But
Right.
or like, eating something that you haven't eaten in a while. That can be hard. That could be really scary. Even I have a student right now in FODMAP Freedom that I'm kind of gradually working on in the Q&As. I think she has a lot of like dogmatic nutrition thinking.
Yeah.
She thinks that grains are bad. She thinks that meat is just intrinsically unhealthy and bad and awful and evil. And I'm kind of gradually chipping away at that. I'm trying to be gentle and like a human about it. And I'm not coming in with a wagging finger saying like, everything you believe is wrong. But also I would love to do that. I forget where I was going with that point, but can I share I mentioned before, let's laugh at me for a second. And I think I shared this in a moderately recent episode, but I'm going to bring it up again. So again, I don't want you to think that we are sitting from this magical throne on top of Magical Mountain or whatever it was that I named it. And we're just like, ha ha ha, we are like Zen Buddhist monks who only think in long-term strategy terms, and we are in perfect health and perfect homeostasis with our environment. I shared, again, I think a couple episodes ago, that I would like to take off just a couple pounds. Nothing crazy, like 5, maybe 10 tops pounds. I've just turned into a little bit more of a bump on a log than I would appreciate. And I know a lot of it is movement focused. My nutrition is pretty rock solid, but I need to move more.
Right.
And I kid you not, before our recent move, I was getting into the habit of exercising and I was super proud of myself. I kid you not though, I was in disappointment valley because I worked out for like a week and then I got on the scale and was like, oh man, like not even a smidge. And then I worked out for another week and I got on the scale and was like, oh man, not even a little bit. But that's absurd, right? I worked out for a week or 2 and I was expecting to see some sort of shift in the number on the scale. I know that that's dumb and that that's not how it works. And I still did it anyway, because again, we have shared human brain lesions that all of us have. We're just silly gooses, every single one of us. And it's just like acknowledging that that's something that we all share and taking the time to acknowledge it and zoom out, I think is really helpful. Again, I did it and I felt that pang of disappointment. But then almost immediately I laughed at myself and was like, I'm doing the thing that I tell people not to do all the time. Oh, brain lesions. And I just kind of moved on with my life. And I knew deep in my heart of hearts, I knew, Nikki, you have to keep up with it for more than a week or two. In a couple of months, then you'll see the needle move on the scale. But it's not going to be an overnight success story here.
And it cracks me up too, because sometimes the opposite happens where someone will have an immediate loss. And usually it's because they've cut too many calories. They've cut a bunch of calories out, and then it's like they lose like 5 pounds in a week. Probably a lot of it's water weight. It's not even true weight. And then it's like they do another week and they only lost like a pound. And then they're like, that's not good. And then they go another week and they have a week that they didn't lose anything.
Or they gained a pound.
Right. And then it's like, screw it. And then everything goes to shit.
In this version of the metaphor, I would say they went over instant gratification mound. I'm not even going to say it's a hill.
Yeah.
But like the losing 5 pounds immediately, that is instant gratification mound. Then they hit Valley of Disappointment, and then they never got to Magnificent Mountain.
Right.
They had a little whoop, and they got all excited, and then,
well, and there's a lot of that in the gut health space too, where maybe you did have success with antimicrobials and it feels like that's the answer. So you keep going back and realizing you're getting less efficacy each time, which is super common with my clients, and I'm sure your clients too, where if they do get success with herbals or antibiotics, it's usually the first couple times, and then it's way less helpful over time. So I do think that can trip people up too, because they feel like the promise was fulfilled somewhat, but only short term.
Well, it's like in their mind, they proved the efficacy of that treatment, right? Antimicrobials work. I proved it because the antimicrobial made me feel better.
Right.
And similarly, too, with food. If you feel good when you cut out a food or a couple of foods, in your mind, you proved that cutting out foods works for you.
Right.
So naturally, you're going to want to go that direction because in your mind, it's already a proven strategy, right? So you'd be a fool not to try it again at some point. But again, it's if you do it again and again and again and again, and you're getting less and less and less and less and less benefit when you're doing this repeatedly, then again, at some point you have to step back and go, maybe I need a new direction, or maybe I just need to shift focus somehow. And again, I think just zooming out and identifying, like the list that I proposed in the beginning of the episode, zoom out and just label how many things are directly gut focused versus anything else, and kind of tally them up and see where your emphasis is being placed. Similarly, you could add another column to that page and you could just label short or long, right? For every single intervention, every single pill and thing that you're doing, labeling it as, okay, is this a short or a long-term strategy? And then counting them up and seeing, out of the 18 things that I'm doing, 14 of them are short term and 15 of them are gut directed, like directly gut directed, right? So those are kind of flags for you to pay attention and to try to shift gears and kind of zoom out again. Another way of thinking that this was the point that I was going to make a fair while ago, and then we just got talking about other good juicy stuff and I didn't get a chance to share it. You've seen at least a few episodes of The Good Place, right?
Yes.
Okay. I had a vague recollection that I think Armand has seen the whole show, but you've only seen a few episodes. Side note, I need to give you this as a homework assignment because it's so good. But you know of Janet, right?
Is that
She's like the Alexa almost of that world. Yeah. So for those of you who haven't seen the show, first of all, run out and watch it immediately. It's excellent. It's my favorite show. But B, the good place is essentially heaven and the bad place is hell. And you're following these humans in their afterlife. And in the afterlife, they have a Janet. And Janet is an anthropomorphized version, kind of like Alexa. Like you just say Janet and she pops out of nowhere, and you could ask her to get you anything you want, or you could ask her a question and she knows all the answers for everything in the universe, right? So you could ask her, Janet, give me a pizza that is a mile wide, topped with unicorn dust and avocado, and she will produce it for you like instantly.
Right.
Or you could ask her, who did Galileo date before he died? I don't know. You get the idea. So at the very end of the show, I'm not going to give away anything, but at the very, very end of the show, they mentioned something, and Janet shares that she doesn't experience time the same way the humans do. And she explained that she's kind of living all moments all at once. So it's just, she doesn't have a concept of past, present, and future so much. It's like she's living all of the moments all at once. So another very specific niche way that you could think of this is if Janet had IBS or SIBO or Candida or whatever, and she has no concept of time, and she does not experience time the same way we do. So to her, it doesn't matter if she feels better tomorrow versus 5 years from now. It's all the same to her. What would Janet do to set herself up for success? Would she be doing the obliterating with antimicrobials and getting every new probiotic that you see an Instagram ad for? And
it would still be what would WWJD.
It would be. What would Janet do? That's right. Yes. I like that. Yes.
Yeah,
so maybe get yourself one of those snazzy bracelets and remember, what would Janet do?
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy. One thing too to be careful of is after you listen to this episode, don't just urgently focus on long-term goals either, because you can frantically then overcompensate and say, well, I have to address stress. I got to address sleep. And get all in a tizzy too with that. So, try to do things bit by bit. So maybe focus on one thing first. If you feel like you can tackle a couple things at once, that's fine too. But if you feel like you're focusing in this, like you feel like you're operating in the same gear as you were with the short-term solutions, it still might be a bit problematic. So just know that this might take time, and you can implement things in a manner where you're going to find success, because if you're throwing too much at yourself too, it will also lead to probably disappointment, because habits are hard. So if you can get a habit online to start and then weave in other things, because once you establish a habit, it's easier to continue doing it. So probably the first 3 to 4 weeks of establishing a habit is the hardest. So getting to bed at a certain time and waking up at a certain time and really prioritizing sleep. Maybe spend 3 weeks doing that and feel very solid. And it's easier then to add something else in. So then it's easier to do a little bit of stress management. Or you could do it a different way by maybe focusing a little bit on sleep if that needs a little tweak, and a little tweak on something else. But if you're biting off more than you can chew, that might not be great either. Also, one thing from that book, Atomic Habits, that I like a lot is he recommends something called habit stacking, meaning if you already have an established habit that you do every day. So let's say you shower every day in the morning. That's something that's automatic. If you can pair that habit with a new habit, it tends to help with efficacy of establishing that habit. So if you know you're going to brush your teeth at a certain time and you start pairing right before you brush your teeth, you do breath work or something, or I don't know, something else. But if you pair a habit that's already established with a new habit, you have better chance of sticking to that habit. So that's something to think about. Also having stuff out. So if you want to get into walking or something, set your running shoes out the day before, or your walking shoes out the day before.
I find that helps a ton.
Right.
Like if I leave a yoga mat on the floor in my office, laid out, not even rolled up.
Right.
If I leave it out, I'm so much more likely to get on it and actually do some stretching.
Right.
Similarly, this you would have seen this for all of season 1 pretty much, but I always had a camera covered up with like a tie-dye cloth.
Yeah.
I always had all of my camera equipment, all of my lighting equipment, the big old tripod. I always left that set up in the middle of my room because I noticed with my YouTubing, if I leave everything set up and the only thing I have to do is take the dust cover off my camera and turn on the lights, if it's that easy, I could be really good about one YouTube video every week.
Right.
If I fold up the tripods and I put the camera away and I put the umbrella lights away, if I pack up stuff even a little bit more, I'm much less likely to record my YouTube videos. So yeah, that's a really good one too. Leave your stuff
Yeah.
out. Leave your shoes out, or
If you want to journal, like, put your journal
Yeah.
somewhere you can see it. If even having sometimes post-it notes somewhere just as a reminder can be helpful. Again, don't get obsessive with it, but if you want to put like a post-it note on your computer as a reminder to do
reminders
something,
on your phone.
right? Reminder on your phone, that kind of stuff, I think could be helpful too.
Yeah. I think though, similarly, to piggyback off of your point, I like how you described it. If you're trying to do the long-term stuff in the same gear as you were with the short-term stuff, again, if you're approaching it from that frantic or obsessive place of like, oh my God, I have to nail down all these things now. Oh my God. I think that it's that energy that's biting you in the butt the worst, honestly. And it might not much matter if you're coming at it with that energy, but you're taking a probiotic versus getting really militant about your sleep. It's the rigidity and it's the like frantic anxiousness that we're talking about that really comes around and gets you. So
Well,
just be mindful of your approach there.
Yeah, it's still, I almost think it's still rooted in this idea that you have to be better tomorrow. Because there's still a desperate, frantic nature of getting all your ducks in a row. So it's still this gear of, I need to get everything aligned and perfect today, so tomorrow I'll be better. But
Yeah.
even that's not realistic either. So it's operating in this from a mindset that's still possible. I don't know. It's you almost want to shift your mindset to begin with to a long-term mindset versus coming at long-term strategies with the short-term mindset.
Well, and I think the expression plan for the worst, hope for the best comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
So if you can kind of resign yourself to the idea that you'll feel better, but not immediately,
Right.
right? If you resign yourself to the idea that you will feel better in 2 years, and you can just kind of sit with that and deal with the valley of disappointment and be like, oh, that really sucks. I want to feel better sooner than that. But if you can get through that initial suctitude and resign yourself to that possibility, then as you implement things and you're able to move through the journey with more ease and less franticness, you might find that you're pleasantly surprised. In planning for the worst, quote unquote, in this case, if you plan on, all right, I'm just going to feel better in 2 years or 5 years from now, just releasing that and allowing yourself to come to that conclusion, you might find that you feel better a lot quicker a month from now. And
Right.
it might be that some of that is directly due to the fact that you release that urgency. And some of it is because in releasing that urgency, you were able to focus on the things that actually matter. But again, plan for the worst, hope for the best, I think is a reasonable strategy.
Right. I almost think the ultimate exposure for someone that's in that urgent mindset, and this was very helpful for me at times, to just take a break from doing anything could be potentially helpful. So spending a month of just maybe time connecting with things you've neglected, whether that's like relationships or passions or hobbies.
Yeah.
And just taking a breather. Now, if that feels insane to you, you also might be the person that may need that the most. So
Yeah.
it's challenging, but taking a break, a gut health break of doing anything extra, maybe you stick with some things that generally keep symptoms under better control, but anything active, taking like a month off, I feel can be valuable for some people.
Absolutely.
So that you can regroup and establish your baseline again and just recharge a bit before doing anything else. And it takes you out of that urgent type state just to allow you to chill and
Well,
sit.
again, it's the ultimate exposure to
Right.
your point.
Right.
And I think we talked about this in a recent episode. I think, was it the free or cheap episode maybe, where we talked about the idea of just taking a break and doing nothing new
Right.
for a while. And I think also it's good to point out here, if you want to take a breather, take a break for a month or two, if there is something that you know for sure is helping you, you could keep that in.
Right.
But then
Right.
anything where you're kind of on the fence or you think it helps, but only a smidgen, those are the things I would say chop out for that month. So, sometimes people will be like, OMG, this probiotic was the most miraculous probiotic I ever tried in my life. And usually this comes up when I recommend stool testing and they ask me, do I have to discontinue the probiotic for the stool testing? Because I
Right.
really, really don't want to go off of it. If you love something that much, or if it's helped you that profoundly, you could continue something like that through this break that we're proposing. But
Yeah.
I find that most people, the absolute majority of their supplements and pills and potions, like 95% of their pills and potions, when I actually ask them if it's helping, they'll be like, I don't know. Or they'll say, yeah, a bit.
Right.
Or they pause for an abnormally long period of time because they're thinking about it because they're really not sure. If there's anything like that where you're not completely, utterly convinced that it's helping you, then those are the things that you take a break from if you do take a break,
Right.
as a side note. But yeah, I think that this has been a really good episode, if I do say so
Whoa.
myself, on both of our parts. I really hope everybody listens to the full hour and a half
I know.
episode.
Woof.
This was a long one. I have one thing to briefly discuss and a question for my dear co-host before we wrap up. I remembered to ask you this question when it was too late and we had already stopped filming our last episode, which, by the way, I did decide to title Breaking Up with SIBO. In that episode, I mentioned the YouTube videos that I did about the deep dive on the literature with SIBO breath testing. For what it's worth, 2 of them have posted as of the recording of this episode. The next one goes live tomorrow. The false positives with lactulose got kind of a normal amount of views. Funny enough, the false positives with glucose video is performing very poorly.
Really?
As far as like my YouTube stats go. And I don't always pay super close attention, but YouTube does this thing on my app where it shows you the number of views and the average duration and the click-through rate, and it compares it to your average for a video that's been out for the same amount of time. Yeah, very few people are interested in the false positives with glucose video. I will be very curious when the third one posts, the one false negatives with glucose. It'll be curious to see if anybody clicks on that one, because right now, the second video in this series is kind of bombing a little bit. It was still worth it. I would do it again and again, absolutely, because I would rather bring you the truth and I would rather bring you accurate information than play into YouTube's algorithm game. But yeah, fascinating. But my question, dear Amy, was knowing what we know now and knowing what we talked about in the last episode with the high rates of false positives on SIBO breath testing, do you think you really had SIBO? Like bona fide, honest to goodness, increased quantity bacterial overgrowth. Do you think you had SIBO, or do you think that yours was more of like dysbiosis, IBS, poor motility, poor digestion kind of stuff?
Oh, I probably did not have SIBO is my guess. I mean, I think in terms of my SIBO clients that I work with, my SIBO clients that have been diagnosed, I was very much along the same lines. I think from my standpoint, I had all the symptoms, the bloating, the discomfort, the IBS symptoms. I think mine was very much dysbiosis driven compared to anything else. So yeah, I don't know. I would say no if I had to put money on it. I was more methane dominant too. And like even I mean, I haven't looked at my tests in a while. I can't remember exactly where I was falling, but you know, I feel like it was even like, I'd be curious to pull them back up and see where my levels were exactly and when the rise was in my methane. But I worked with multiple providers that diagnosed me with SIBO. So it's interesting. It's so funny too, because, you know, I feel like no matter what the test would have shown, the providers would have still said it's SIBO. It's just a false negative. It's just a false a false negative.
Yeah. Well,
so that's the annoying, sad part about the whole situation is I think we're learning so much more about what causes symptoms of bloating for the majority of people. Now, I think there is true cases of outright SIBO, but I do think we're overdiagnosing it for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
I think I had SIMD, as we've said.
That's right.
As we've
coining that term
used before, small intestinal or small. Yeah. Is it SIMD? Yeah. Small
SIMD.
Intestinal microbiota.
Microbial dysbiosis.
Okay, yeah. I think
that opens the door for archaea and yeast.
Right.
And maybe viruses. Right. Who knows? We don't know jack shit about the virome. That's a whole nother episode once we actually get some research on that and read up on that a bit.
Yeah.
The viral microbiome. Ooh, that'll have to be a very deep PubMed deep dive though, because I know almost nothing about the virome at this point. So that'll have to be a topic for another day, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that this was a juicy one. I hope that our viewers feel the same way. As always, guys, feel free to comment on YouTube, like, subscribe, etc. If you're on a podcasting app like Apple or Spotify, we would deeply appreciate a 5-star review. And we will see you right back here in the next rip-roaring episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. So until then, take care, and we'll see you next Monday.